Hey, thank you all very much for taking the time to join us. I'm going to start as we always start when we do town halls, whether it be telephone or in person. And I'm going to start with a prayer, and then we're going to get right into, as quickly as possible, questions to give the most opportunity for discussion. That's what a town hall is about. So if you'll join me in prayer. Lord, we're grateful to live in a country that has been blessed for generations. And our ask in this nation, so many of us, is that we would do the things that honor you, that align with your word of where commanded blessing comes from. And as a result of that, we would see, as often, many times, people want your blessing over their country, but they're not willing to do the things of obedience. And so give us a heart change in this country to be obedient, that we may eat the good of the land, that we be willing and obedient, that we may eat the good of the land, not just for ourselves, but for our generations to follow. In the name of Jesus, amen. All right. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about latest happenings. Some of you are well aware of the CR that has become a word that a lot of people don't like in conservative circles that I operate in. There was a reason why many of us, absent Thomas Massey, who is a friend, I respect Thomas to the nth degree. He is very principled. He was the only person, what I would consider the true conservative faction by voting record, by scoring indexes, multiple scoring indexes. That was a no. I disagree with Thomas, Chip Roy, and others. That went on the news and were subtly trying to say, "Come on, Thomas." Thomas ultimately, again, I respect him, and we just had a difference of opinion. He was the only one out of all the members of Congress that did not vote for. And this is what the CR did. I think it's important. So many times we talk about a continuing resolution, and we just assume it continued. This is what that CR did. It's the first time in history that I'm aware of that a CR actually cut spending. And it cuts spending by $7 billion. There were absolutely no earmarks. It was a truly clean CR. It did alignment with constitutional principles. It did something on the defense element. It actually enacted the first pay raise for junior enlisted troops in 40 years at about a 14%. So relative to constitutional mandate of 1/4 of our Article 1 enumerated powers, Army, Navy, militia, regulatory functions to each, we were able to make sure that we're doing things to add to recruitments. Great news. Some of you watched the State of the Union address. One of the highlights of what President Trump's been talking about is Army, Navy, Air Force are at 15-year high recruiting goals. And under the Biden administration, they were struggling to get to 70, 75, 80%, 85% of their recruitment goals. And it's also kind of like the line that President Trump had in the State of the Union address, where he was talking about illegal crossings at the border, which, by the way, are down 96% year over year compared to last year, where some of you remember in the State of the Union address where he said, some have said that we needed new laws in order to get the border under scrutiny to secure that border. And we didn't. All we needed was a new president. And the same thing has applied, whether it be recruitment, whether it be jobs. In Biden's last 2 years in office, 25% of all new job growth was government specific. 1 month under Trump, 10,000 jobs added. Most of those, about 9,000 of those in the auto manufacturing sector. 93% of all the jobs added have been in the free market. And so the play for the previous administration, the Democrat administration, is government growth. And this one is to unleash the free market. Something else that many of us that are considered budget hawks, deficit hawks, have been working on. I'm on the budget committee. Chip Roy, myself, and Andrew Clyde, Ralph Norman on the budget committee among the Freedom Caucus members. We're in the office with the Speaker of the House the night before this, as President Trump is calling it, the One Big Beautiful Bill framework was put out. And many of us on the budget committee helped fashion that. Great work by Paul Winfrey and Chip Roy. One of the things that we've been asking for, several of us on that budget committee, was the ability to have adjustment controls so that as we're able to extend the tax cuts, that we make sure we don't increase deficit spending. And we were able to do that, whereas our ability to deliver upon some of the things that President Trump talked about while he ran for president, we're able to make sure those are achieved by true reforms in spending. And so it will be a $2 trillion trade-off in order to accomplish the goals of where President Trump wants to go in terms of extension of the tax cuts and the additional things. Part of that also includes going after the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, what President Trump called the Green New Scam. Today, I've been working on a letter, thanks to the great work by our LD, Lauren Graham, and working in tandem with the author of Fossil Future, a letter encouraging my colleagues. They'll go out and get a number of colleagues to sign on to that we've got to do something about these 8 tax subsidies that are a part of the IRA that Democrats brought into fruition. There's a great march up here, even within Republican colleagues, to try to preserve some of those. The problem is there's no defining line. There's no defining principle once you begin to subscribe to what the Democrats put in place. The Republicans' conservative principle has long been let the free market determine what's most reliable, affordable in terms of the energy, not what the government sees as a preferential treatment through tax subsidies. And so part of this budget framework we put together is to gut the IRA and be able to go in and do some mandatory spending reform. Lastly, I was honored in that budget committee process. Once we got agreement from the speaker, the next day we rolled it out with the reforms that some of us helped craft. Kat Kemick from Florida allowed me the great privilege to carry her REINS Act, the fourth branch of government regulatory. We put into the reconciliation bill, again, the one big beautiful bill that President Trump was talking about. I was able to add at Kat Kemick's request, carrying it, the requirement that we stop the bureaucratic ad of legislating. And this requires us, if there's an economic impact of 100 million or more, no longer can bureaucrats sitting in cubicles who are unelected add new regulations. It has to be with congressional approval. I was able to add that as an amendment on this one big beautiful bill. It's called the REINS Act, and typical of what REINS does, it's the ability to sit back and say whoa and stop this fourth branch of government from defying Article 1 powers, which say all legislative powers be vested in the Congress, not unelected bureaucrats. And so we've got a perverse incentive for bureaucracy to do things with government that choke. It's a catalytic converter choking out our economy. Again, something as a shout out to President Trump, his promise to, for every one regulation added, he's going to get rid of 10. Just in us returning back to 1980 levels of regulations, the Mercatus Study Center says would save us, actually would add to, as my staff and I have updated it, about $5 to $6 trillion to our $29 trillion gross domestic product. And if you apply that to every worker, it's tens of thousands of dollars in the pocket of people working. So, but I think it's about a $14,000 per worker add in terms of what dollars could go towards in terms of increasing wages, not regulatory compliance. All right, with that, Darren, let's open the phone lines. Those are the things we've been working on. And some of us in the last couple of days were with the speaker, advocating him in a small group session. Let the House lead. Let us take this budget framework that we've done, as the Senate has not yet to take it up. Mr. Speaker, it's a group of about 6 to 7 of us saying to him, please, let's be the ones that are putting the meat on the bones, showing that we can thread the needle, because I'm really excited about this budget framework, that reconciliation, the one big beautiful bill. All right, Darren, let's start the town hall in terms of questions and learning from our constituents.
All right, our first question is going to come from Tina from Tahlequah. Tina, you're now live.
Well, first I want to say thank you, Congressman, for all the good work you guys are doing up there in supporting us. My question is, how, as American citizens, how can we help you stop these federal judges from ruling our country and slow walking President Trump?
Yeah. So, Tina, great question. In fact, that was one of the things this group of 6 to 7 of us were having a conversation with the speaker about. Jim Jordan is going to be carrying a measure, sounds like as early as next week, or at least the rule for this measure, to be able, and I mentioned this to the speaker, in Article 1, Section 8, one of the 18 enumerated powers is inferior court establishment. What that means is, I was relaying to the speaker yesterday in this small group setting, anyone who says, well, that's a separation of powers, which kind of came up in that conversation from some other colleague. And I subtly had to say, but keep in mind that the Supreme Court, yes, is listed in Article 3 of the Constitution, President Article 2, us as the legislative body Article 1. However, that The inferior courts are left as one of the enumerated powers that Congress can do what we want to. In terms of establishing, the Supreme Court could be one man in one desk, sitting with one lamp. Constitution doesn't mention nine people. It's been historically precedent that way for decades. And I want to preserve that, by the way, just because some of you know the push of trying to politicize the Supreme Court even further and change that number. So I do believe it needs to stay at 9. But inferior court establishment, the appellate court, the district courts, all these judges that, 50% of all these injunctions historically apply to Donald Trump over our nation's history. Now think about that. And like 93% of them come from people that we know are from radicalized areas or people that are politically active. And so we've got a real problem with anybody across the country that can bring about an injunction. And so what Jim Jordan leadership is talking about doing, I think it is probably the way that we're going to be able to get this passed, is looking at reforming inferior court establishment left to the Congress, whether it be a panel or determination for a select court to be the one where they can be the presiding justices on what is constitutional and what is not relative to presidential action. Now, I want you to know, and I brought this up to the speaker, you used to have judges that were impeached for drunkenness. I know that thanks to David Barton. I mentioned that because he knows David Barton from Wall Builders. And the speaker reminded me in that conversation yesterday that there had been 16. Some of them were for profanity. One of the other things I mentioned to this small group yesterday is that George Mason, which is applicable, it's a little different context because impeachment, according to the Constitution, is to be to the president, the vice president, and civil servants. Judges are to be retained on, quote, good behavior. The opposite of that is bad behavior, but there's a principle here. As I mentioned yesterday, a small group, George Mason, the founding father, in 1787 in the Constitutional Convention, they only had bribery and treason as a part of the Constitution impeachment grounds. George Mason said, in effect, what happens if someone chooses not to abide by the Constitution? And so the founding fathers added high crimes and misdemeanors for that very purpose, for someone who chose not to abide by original intent, constitutional adherence, and just saw the Constitution, the rule of law, as just a parchment barrier to be broken through. I'm one of those that signed on to these and co-authored these other Eli Crane and Andrew Clyde and Brandon Gill's measures on impeachment. However, we've got some in our conference that won't support that, can't see clear to see the validity of the opposite of good behavior being bad behavior and judicial activism versus original intent. So what I just described about the panel inferior court modifications, I think is the thing that will be passed in this Congress.
All right, our next question is going to be from Sam from Bartlesville. Sam, you're now live.
Thank you for taking my question. Last time you had this meeting, you hit a little bit on the food stamp situation, maybe aligning it more with WIC to cut down on the sugar. And the second one, and do apologize for this, was when people cross the border, are we getting fingerprints? Are we getting a blood sample for DNA, pictures, and having them do check-ins from time to time?
Yeah, that was long. Let me just start with the second question first. That was long-standing template under the Trump administration. Again, keep in mind, we kept saying as a Congress and the Homeland Security Committee that I'm on, we don't need law changes. There were 64 different executive actions that brokered an open border. And President Trump, State of the Union, people have been saying we need to change the law to secure the border. Border illegal crossings are down 95% year over year, 1 month, February now compared to February under Biden. And President Trump rightly said, we didn't need a new laws. We needed a new president. All right. So the ability to secure that border, the ability to make sure children, UACs, unaccompanied minors, when they're being used by people that would prey upon them, whether it's for sexual predators, for sex slavery or work slavery, putting them into very horrible situations. The Trump administration had DNA to confirm someone said that they were related to these children. The Biden administration got rid of that. So I have every expectation. I've not read that it's occurred. I have every expectation forthcoming that is going to be reinstated policy. But here's the reality of what's happening at the border. You've got Fox News saying that they can't find anybody crossing. You got CBS News saying we at least would see one group coming across the border. They're saying we can't find anybody when we go down there and visit right now. But I do still expect that to be re-implemented policy. Your first question was relative to SNAP. Yesterday, again, Lauren Graham, our legislative director, and I got on a call with the SNAP advisor to Brooke Rollins, the new Secretary of Ag. And we had a long conversation with Jen, who worked for the House Ag Committee. I've never met her. Interestingly enough, for anybody that would know Bart Fisher from Frederick, Oklahoma, who I went to college with in the College of Ag at Oklahoma State University, she was a former colleague of his. But we had a long conversation about this and the performance horse industry that's being hit by Biden-era regulations on soaring. And as somebody that comes from the performance horse industry, that is totally not a part of anything that you would find within the quarter horse, performance horse industries, cutting, reining, rodeo-related events, team roping. It's something relative to Tennessee walkers. So we talked about how that regulation was way intrusive, had nothing to do, soaring had nothing to do with so many horse disciplines. There's more equine per capita between Dallas, Texas, and Ardmore, Oklahoma than anywhere else in the world. It's absolutely tied into 4-H, FFA events, rodeo events. And so we had that conversation. Plus on SNAP, she's an expert on that. And because Callie Means, who advises RFK, I was in communication with him yesterday. He wrote a nice article for us that was in, I think, USA Today, talking about our bill. We have great expectations of trying to take our measure of the 20% spent on food stamps that's going to candy and soda, 10% only to soda, and making that healthy. And of course, you got people that peddle these goods and services that don't like that because it makes up a huge amount of their income, and they love to threaten members with primary opponents, and that's happened. And so you got to have people stand on courage and say, look, we're spending $60 billion a year on the obesity-related epidemic that we're compounding just on the food stamp program. 1 in 8 people are on food stamps. 1 in 4 people are on Medicaid in this country. And so it makes sense. Go back to historical norms. That what was food stamps originally was things that were healthy, that were excess surplus from farms. And so we think it's smart for the downstream effect on the healthcare side that is many times picked up. If 1 in 4 people are on Medicaid, as our stats show, for us to limit those food groups to be nutritious, not candy and not soda that leads to diabetes, obesity, and so many adverse effects. And so we are working with the administration within USDA to try to figure out how you delineate. In fact, when I was in the College of Ag, Oklahoma State, we had something, if I remember correctly, it's called total digestible, or oh my gosh, I'm forgetting now, but it was when you would take a food group and you would burn it down to get a chemical analysis of it. I think it was called TDN. Somebody that's animal science graduate from Oklahoma State or an ANSI professor is probably going to correct me on this, but it was a way to determine the true nutritional value within food groups. And so I was asking them yesterday, is there a food scientist out there that can help us really delineate? Because that's one of the special definitions we want to employ on the food groups, not just the soda element to this. And so that was one of the things we were working on yesterday with USDA.
All right, just a reminder to dial *3 if you'd like to ask the Congressman a question, and then *6 if you'd like to subscribe to the e-newsletter. Our next question is going to come from Richard from Coffeyville. Richard, you're now live with the Congressman.
Actually, South Coffeyville, Oklahoma. But I wondered, is there anything that you guys can do to help lower our electricity bills and our gas bills? 4 years ago, I was paying $300 a month for electricity.
So let me say that on the federal level, the things that we can do is part of what this letter I'm putting together. The states under state incentives like California that have started employing things that aren't based on the free market principles of reliable, affordable energy. They started getting into wind and solar like California. They're almost, I think, I have to go back and remember, I think it's like twice the per kilowatt hour cost. These states that are, quote, going green for this climate alarmist ideology, they started going green. They're increasing the utility bills. Ours in Oklahoma are like 12 cents per kilowatt hour. And so as I write in this letter, we're in Oklahoma specifically, we're leaving the Inflation Reduction Act. As I wrote in the letter, trying to get other colleagues to join me in this, This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Either we repeal the IRA now or we will not get that chance again through reconciliation. It's how the Democrats put it in. And if we don't repeal the wind and solar tax credits, the Energy and Information Administration talks about all the new growth in the last several years is built on the back of wind and solar. But you know what that displaces? Natural gas. Cheap, reliable, clean natural gas. Oklahoma is a top 5 exporter of natural gas. And all the growth for the support of our electric grid is going to be on the back. All the new growth is going to be on wind and solar, subsidized by you, the taxpayer, which leads to deficit spending. The reason why we have $2 trillion deficit spending, in part, the 10-year impact over the IRA is about $1 trillion, according to Goldman Sachs or CBO at $750 billion. And so the thing that we can do the most on the federal level is let the free market reign. In areas where Republicans have stood for years and on solid fiscal, solid, oh my gosh, the word is slipped, whatever. Solid ground conservatism that says that let the free market reign. Philosophical, that's the word I was looking for. Let the free market reign. And the philosophical high ground to stand there, we will operate in hypocrisy when we try to protect anything by saying it has to have preferential treatment from the government. And that increases the cost. There's no efficiency in that. Whatever the government tries to make affordable, they always make too expensive, whether it's healthcare or any other area. You will find that time and time again.
All right, our next question is going to be from Wednesday, from Dewey. Wednesday, you're now live.
Hi, Congressman.
Hi,
My
Wednesday.
question is, good evening. My question is about what are we doing to help alleviate the strain on our seniors? I feel very strongly that they should be exempt from taxes, property taxes, income taxes, sales tax, all of it. I feel like when you reach that point in your life that you should be exempt from being taxed anymore.
Yeah. Well, look, I would say to you that to be principled based, I think the most principled thing we can do and the most prosperous thing we can do as a country is to return back to what we had prior to 1913, and that is uniformity. The word uniform was in the United States Constitution, and when the 16th Amendment replaced the word uniformity with graduated tax brackets, we got these 7 different tax brackets now. We stopped employing what the founders believed was the fairest way of making sure that people by their government were treated fairly. It was based upon, that's why when Ben Carson ran for president, you remember him talking about, I think it was either the fair or the flat tax, which I'm a supporter of both. But he talked about the Levitical code in the Old Testament of the Bible, and that God, who is the ultimate arbitrator of what is fair and just, he prescribed in the tithe. Now, that was under theocracy. We don't have a theocracy in America, right? We have a government that was never designed to kick God out of a place of part of our governance. That was never what our founders intended. That thing has totally been perverted in terms of the way that people have tried to reinterpret Thomas Jefferson's Danbury Baptist letter. He was promising that the government wouldn't pick denominations, not to exclude God from the public square. If that was the case, we wouldn't have on our money in our Pledge of Allegiance and God we trust. So that's a side conversation. But the fairest arbitration, as Ben Carson advocated, which is why I'm an advocate of either the flat or the fair tax, is uniformity. And that prescribes to the tithe that if you, in a proportion to your increase, determines how much you pay. Not these graduated tax brackets that Churchill called the gospel of envy, where we try to prescribe different rates for different people, right? The fairness of proportionate taxation, uniformity, is if you make a whole lot in proportion to your increase, then you would pay it. That's how the tithe was built in the Levitical Code, and is how our founders believed in and why they set it up in our Constitution. If you didn't make a whole lot in proportion to your increase, you didn't pay a whole lot. And so justice was employed in the tax code. And so, we have totally perverted, I believe, with these graduated tax brackets, preferential treatment, what is true tax justice. So to be constitutional, to go back to original intent, I believe the flat tax or the fair tax is the right way for our country. And I think that the 1913 16th Amendment did a whole lot of damage to our country. The 17th Amendment replacing United States senators from being beholden to state legislative body and popular right after that. It was a bad time for our country the era of Woodrow Wilson and Herbert Hoover, who was a Republican, but he was very progressive. And those are things. Some of those decisions set us up for the 1930s growth of government. All right.
Just a reminder again to dial *3 if you'd like to ask the Congressman a question, and *6 if you'd like to subscribe to the e-newsletter. Our next question is going to be from Deborah from Claremore. Deborah, you're now live.
Thank you. Hello? Thank you.
Hello, Deborah.
Hi. First, you've thrown some things at me I didn't know. We have 90% less border crossings than last year.
Year over year.
How
Yes,
would
ma'am.
you-
Can I give you 1 month statistic change? It's 80% January. Biden's still in office, right? Full month of January. President Trump takes over, has a full month of February. We went from the month of January, just the change of 1 month over another. Border crossings in 1 month between Biden to Trump went down 80%. So year over year, down 95%. February compared under Biden under February of Trump. But just month over month, it reduced. What does that tell you? The bully pulpit of our borders was open.
That is awesome. How did he do it?
He got elected saying, we're going to enforce the law. And so he used the bully pulpit, and people pay attention. People that were coming in this country wanted to take advantage of us, or cartel-driven, fentanyl-driven, illegal activity so beholden, not just those seeking a better life. They got the point.
But what did he actually do? What did he do, Congressman?
Executive order after executive order, he began to employ. But I would tell you, it had so much to do with who took the office and the things he was saying that the people that making the decision a month or two ago, whether do I take this months on end journey to get into the United States? Wait a minute, Trump wins. I'm out on that. And we knew by November 5th, right? He won.
Scared them. So he scared the immigrants. What he was saying stopped them from coming because they're terrified of us.
It's like my father, who trained cutting horses for 25 years, used to tell us when we were starting colts. You make the right thing easy and the wrong thing hard. So he was indicating he was going to make the right thing easy and the wrong thing hard, and people understood he meant what he said.
He hasn't changed anything at the border, though. I've been there. It looks the same. I mean, it never. I'm really
well, ma'am, according to CBS, I won't use Fox. According to CBS, they can't even find people crossing. CBS News is saying they can't even find people crossing anymore.
I know.
I'm talking about illegal, not people coming in legally. Ma'am, what is your question?
About Elon Musk, he called Social Security a Ponzi scheme. I'm 72. I can't deal with Elon Musk tearing up our government like he is.
Okay. All right. Well, let me say that in terms of what he said, he needs to answer for that. I didn't know he said that. Let him answer for that. I'm not responsible for Elon's comments. Okay. In terms of him tearing up the government, I would disagree with you. I believe, keep in mind, people that would say, what does he have the authority to do? What he did was he took on an office that Obama created. There's a digital services office that Obama created to employ tech savvy. Keep in mind how that applies to what Elon's doing. Took on this office using tech savvy individuals to find waste. They're running algorithms, computer, all these young men, 20 and 30, who don't wear suits and ties. They're in T-shirts, but they're brilliant in terms of, their technological prowess and their ability to find out fraud and waste. So Trump took President Obama's Digital Services Administration that Obama used to implement healthcare.gov to make sure that he implemented his healthcare.gov spending website, which, by the way, I would contend anybody look at healthcare costs. Again, whatever the government tries to make affordable, they make too expensive. And since 2012, think about how much you're paying on healthcare. It's an example of the government, distorting free market principles. And how that is impacting everybody's ability to purchase healthcare costs. It just continues. The more government you see involved, the more cost, because the free market does not work. Supply and demand does not work. Anybody who wants to correct healthcare, if you think more government is going to be the solution, then what's happened in the last 10 and 15 years as more government's gotten involved? Explain that to me. That's another side note. However, President Trump retooled the Digital Services Administration, put tech-savvy individuals instead of implementing healthcare.gov to go run algorithms. People who heard his State of the Union who want to push back, that he's finding people that are not living, that are taking advantage of Social Security. This is what you need to know. So once you get on Social Security and they keep you in the system, they're not saying that these people are receiving checks from the Social Security Administration. What they're saying is these 115-year-old up to 150-year-old people are still allowed to stay in the system as legitimate people. And what that does, it makes them eligible for other government programs. That's how they're defrauding the system. As President Trump went on in the State of the Union address to talk about, let me give you one great example they found, that Elon found. In 20 to 2021, the PPP loans and other loan categories, they found 3,000 different loans that totaled, 3,000 different loans that accounted to $333 million that were given to people over the age of 115 years of age. And so they received the government program through PPP type loans, but it's because they had a Social Security number. That's so to clear up the miscommunication, and people were trying to make fun of what the president was talking about, these people that are listed. They maintain them in the Social Security database. Doesn't mean they're receiving checks from Social Security, but they're receiving checks through other areas of government because they look valid through the Social Security Administration. So look, I will tell you today, we heard news that for the conservative Republicans have never been more popular. And I leaned over to a colleague today and I said, it's because they're actually delivering upon what they said they would do about making government efficient. And that's thanks to what DOGE is doing. So look, who has a qualm with stopping people from defrauding your government? Think about that. Take anybody's partisan cap off. Anytime someone is defrauding, you're stealing from people that are legitimately needing those services. It's wrong. And go back and look at the things that have happened through different administrations, both Democrat and Republican, of people for years that have agreed that if we're going to have a chance of right-sizing government, stopping the $2 trillion spending, this is a bipartisan deal that says, let's stop the waste. So it's amazing to me how he's become a lightning rod of hatred when that's what his whole office's goal has been, is to target areas where we're blowing money. And it's not going to true need. All right, next question.
All right, our next question is going to come from Donna in Durant. Donna, you're now live.
Hello, and thank you for this opportunity to visit with you this evening.
Yes, ma'am.
I do have a question about the committees that are investigating, and we have literally watched them for years question the same people about the same issues. They find the proof, they have the facts, but nothing happens.
Right.
When are we going to see arrest? When are we going to see people charged?
Yeah. Look, Donna, thank you for the question. I think it's important, right? I've taken over the subcommittee of oversight under Homeland Security. I met with the chairman, Mark Green, today. Some other things we're going to be looking into, NGOs, non-government organizations, and how we've allowed kiddos to be peddled under these NGOs, the illegal crossings. And so I'll be doing a lot of investigations with this subcommittee, oversight committee under Homeland Security, to show these NGOs that preyed upon young, vulnerable people, illegal immigrants who are crossing, and they were taking money, helping recruit people to cross illegally. And we've lost 300,000 kiddos in this country. And so the ultimate reality is that every committee, one of the first things I remember from my training when I became a member of Congress, the whole goal of a legislative committee hearing is for you to make changes to law. Congress does not have the authority to prosecute. What we do, though, is expose information that you turn over to a Department of Justice that you hope then, under the president, enforces the law. I have great optimism under this administration, under Pam Bondi, under the Trump administration, the things that we turn over, there will be prosecutions.
All right, our next question is going to be from Travis in Owasso. Travis, you're now live.
Hey, good evening, Congressman. Thank you so much for the
call.
Hey,
Travis. Thank you.
Hey, I wanted to ask, I mean, what do you see being the biggest thing that you can influence in Congress yourself personally that helps push forward the Trump agenda? With, obviously we've got the border crossings down, which is really a positive thing. But there's obviously spending. I mean, I'm 47 years old. I have an 18-year-old and a 14-year-old. And I mean, I sit there and think, the things that my parents came to rely on and stuff like that. And they planned well, but is even some of those simple things going to be available to me as I get older? Much less my kids. So I was kind of curious what you see being the biggest thing that you personally can influence and help get over the finish line, if you will.
Yep. Hey, thank you for that. Look, it's what I ran on, prayerfully filing 3 hours before the filing deadline in a 14-way primary, convicted about debt and deficit spending, because I'd had such a great mentorship along with Dan Harrigan, who's our district director, and so many people that had the privilege to work for Tom Coburn, and Brian and Jane Treat that own a Chick-fil-A in Claremore, Oklahoma. And I could just go through the list of so many people. Patrick Gwynn, who worked with us, Joni Williams, who does casework with us. We were so mentored by Tom Coburn, who was, kind of alone for years, talking about this issue. And so to be able to carry forward with something that he impressed upon so many of us that had the privilege to work with him, that is it. I was with the White House with President Trump 2 different times 3 weeks ago over the course of 3 weeks. And both one of the times I got to share a message about what he's doing to affect change on the international front by standing on just the simple truths of men are men and women are women. And I thanked him for that, because I'd met with a person speaking at Heritage from another country who said, please pass along to President Trump his stand on these truths. These simple truths are making an impact, not just in your country, but in ours. By the way, President Trump is, in the executive orders, has stopped a lot of these mutilations that are happening federally funded in hospitals across the country that we as an office were trying to expose, where children have been subjected to, at federal taxpayer expense, experiments. And what we know is once a child has gone through full transitioning, they're 20 times more likely to commit suicide than the average population. And the fruit is that God created you in his image, and he created you male and female. And that statistic of once they fully transition is tied to bulimic or anorexia. And there's an element of just not really knowing how to love yourself and what God created. And so that was one message I relayed to President. The next thing I relayed to President Trump in the next meeting, because he brought us in, that some of us that are deficit hawks, privately, was please don't take your foot off of what you and Elon and Doge are doing, because we've got so many. As I ran an amendment last year, I've used this often, try to return arts and humanities spending back to 2019 spending levels. And I only had 80 Republicans, maybe it's 100, in that amendment to appropriation bill. Could only get approximately 100 Republicans out of 220 Republicans to support taking arts and humanities back to 2019. That tells you within our own party, we've got people who don't want to go back home and tell people, yeah, I voted no. Yeah, I voted to reduce spending. It tells you where we're at. As Alexander Tytler warned us as a country hundreds of years ago, that a democracy, which we're a republic, don't mishear me in this, but a democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until people discover they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury. And that's what we're doing. We oftentimes are electing people who promise us more, and it's to our own demise, it's to our children's demise. It's why in the last 20 years, we went from a $10 trillion gross national debt to a $36 trillion national debt. If we don't return to a republic, to be well studied of the issues, be willing to turn against, the only way you can sometimes lead a choir is to turn your back on the crowd. We have to have people that are willing to say, yes, I know it's popular to keep growing government, but it's more important for the integrity for our country and to fulfill the mandate of the Constitution to preserve the blessing of liberty for ourselves and our posterity, that we start downsizing a government that's way outside of its constitutional boundary, that we return to a government small enough to fit within what was the rule of law, what the Constitution actually says the federal government should be doing, and what should be left to the states. This is where I believe I'm most potent. It's why I'm on the budget committee. It's why I've been in meetings with the speaker alone as a group of 5 to 10, crafting the budget resolution framework, the thing that President Trump is calling the one big beautiful bill. It's where I have the most heft in terms of my influence here in D.C. As Byron Donalds told me a week ago, as I was trying to get in contact with somebody because he's close to the administration, Brecheen, what do you want to talk to the administration about? There's one particular person that works for President Trump. He said, "Oh, I know you. If it's you, it's going to be spending." So that's it, man. I'm not trying to be a one-trick pony. You better specialize up here. And that, along with what I'm trying to do on this right now, on the Inflation Reduction Act, because I'm greatly concerned of the impact for our country on unreliable wind and solar. If we don't gut and go back to stop subsidizing things, China is loving it that we're trying to buy more solar panels from them and battery components while they're building more coal-fired plants. And Russia is loving the fact that Europe is now spent more. Russia is, or Europe has spent more buying oil and gas from Russia than they've paid to help Ukraine. Now think about that. Because Europe tried to go green, they're spending more purchasing oil and gas from Russia than they spent helping Ukraine. And so we are cutting off our nose to spite our face in terms of our national security because of what we're doing on the green new scam, as President Trump calls it.
Just a reminder to dial *3 if you'd like to ask the congressman a question, and *6.
Hey, Darren, can you hear me? I can tell I'm gonna get choked up. Can you have somebody bring in the office some water? I'm getting choked up.
Yes, sir. Our next caller is going to be from Jim from Ucha. Jim, you're now live.
Thank you, Congressman.
Hey, he did not. What town are you from?
Ucha. Uchi. It's Uchi.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Uchi Spavinal is what I think you were referencing. Okay.
That's okay. He's close enough.
Yeah.
You know, we've been watching these grocery prices up here, and I'm 75, and a lot of us last fall, the thing that really affected elections is what hits you home personally. And I encouraged so many people I said, we need a straight party ticket this thing and get our people in here. And then in October, the president, when he's running, talked in Detroit about these grocery prices coming down. And now I've got everyone going, with this tariff issue, I mean, we talk about eating healthy, the vegetables and the nuts in the last 90 days, whether I'm at Grove or Bonita or here in Langley, close by in Langley, they're going up in all the stores. And an executive order can freeze that. And I've just been curious why the president knows if these tariffs are going to happen, then we need to freeze. We need to put a cap on what these grocery increases are going to be.
So I want to be honest with you. I would not support that because I do not believe in what you've seen in Jimmy Carter administration of price controls. I think that is counter to my point. Whenever the government tries to make things more affordable, they make it too expensive for everybody. I believe the free market, if you will allow the free market to work, then the free market, is the best way of allocation of scarce resources and prosperity for our country. Now, I'm not going to deny to you that in the short term, the tariffs may not come with different adjustments. However, and I've not heard this directly from President Trump, his ultimate goal, I think, is to get to free trade. Keep in mind what happens in Europe with commodities that they are protecting and they are subsidizing, yet they want us to operate in free trade. That's not real free trade when their government undercuts what our producers in America, farming and ranching, is doing. They are subsidizing. They're making it where we cannot compete. So what President Trump is trying to do is reset these trade distortions. I think and I can't confirm this. I've not asked him this personally, but I've got a friend who knows him pretty well, who had this conversation with him. I want to say that I can't speak to how well this person knows him. Had this conversation, and I believe, based upon what he told me secondhand, that President Trump's real goal is to get us to where we do have free trade. But it's the art of the deal sometimes, right? It's the reason why Kim Jong-un decided that he didn't want to press his rocket button, right? That President Trump reminded him his button was larger. And so he backed him off and cooled Kim Jong-un off of what was a really reckless environment, if y'all will remember. And President Trump came in and he cooled the dictator down. And so I think this is the art of the deal. Look, you give Congress, along with what DOJ is doing, the chance to right-size government and to right size our spending. The reason why a basket of goods compared to January 2020 cost, compared to January 2020, you were spending $1,400 more for the same basket of goods this last year. Why was it that costing you $15,000 more? Because of inflation. And reckless government spending, overspending is inflationary. And as we in the COVID era printed $6 trillion, every bit of that went to quantitative easing, monetizing our debt, which led to inflation. So if you really want to see us bring down the cost, and this is a key point, did you guys know that the 30-year fixed interest rate has gone down every week since President Trump has taken office? Let the free market reign. Let us get government spending under control. Let us right-size government spending, and you will see inflation stop what we've seen under the last 4 years. Almost 20%, that's the stat I was looking for. Almost a 20% increase. That $1,400 per month has been almost a 20% increase in the same basket of goods because of devaluation of your currency, because Congress won't stop their reckless overspend. And some of us are trying to lead in stopping that. Let's really head towards balancing our budget.
All right. Our next question is going to come from Landon in Durant. Landon, you're now live.
Yes, I'm just, with all the budget cuts and everything, I was wondering what the future of the parent choice tax credit is going to be.
The parent choice tax credit. Are you referencing, Landon, what the state of Oklahoma did last year relative to I forget the dollar figure or the cutoff level? That was the state level, but I think it's what you're referencing. And so it wouldn't have any impact.
Tax credit.
I'm sorry?
The private school tax credit.
Yeah, see, that's state level. That was something that the state legislature, so we're not doing anything to impact that on the federal level. Now, look, since you gave us a chance to talk about education, and people want to, are concerned about what the new Secretary of Education is doing in President Trump's executive orders, y'all, you've got to look at what's happening to the NAEP scores, the National Assessment for Education Progress, 8th grade reading, 8th grade math, and 4th grade reading, 4th grade math. If you'll look at the last several decades, we reached a peak after the federal government came online. Some of us may not remember, but about the time my mother was teaching school, we did not have the same federal Department of Education intrusion that we have today. The federal Department of Education was implemented today. It went from a statistical service employing 1,000 people. In 1979, Jimmy Carter, yet again, came in and grew government and grew FEMA. We didn't have FEMA prior to Jimmy Carter, and we did not have the education. And so just so you know, some of the things I'm working on in the Homeland Security Subcommittee is trying to block grant FEMA back to the states. You got a lot of state emergency management directors that would be excited about how they can make their money go further if you would return them back to what was the conditions prior to 1979 before Jimmy Carter created our current FEMA and put it under federal control. And so if we can allow the states, allow the federal government, as I talked to the Homeland Security Chairman today, on the big things, the Helene, the Katrina, but block grant some of these others and give states autonomy under state regulatory burdens. As I experienced running a dozer after the Tushka tornado 2012, so many things are 2 and 3 and 4 times the cost because of matching federal regs. It could be done so much lesser expense on a state level if you just abide by state regs. But the former part of your question about just setting me up for education, our test scores are going down. Federalist 45, James Madison wrote, the powers of the state are to be infinite, meaning unlimited, whatever your state constitution says. The powers of the Fed are to be few and finite, meaning defined. And Jefferson, in his 6th State of the Union address, said, he was actually advocating, Thomas Jefferson said, well, let's get the federal government involved in education. But then he goes on to add the line in his 6th State of the Union address, but you'd have to have a constitutional amendment. James Madison, in his codfish debate of 1792, as the father of our Constitution, said, if we stop being chained down to the 18 enumerated powers of Article 1, Section 8, chained down to those specified powers, then we'll have the federal government involved in education in every classroom and involved in provisions for the poor, policing the streets, and in every other form of government. That's where we're at. The founders never, absent a constitutional change, never wanted the federal government to take control of education. And so what we're talking about, empower school boards and parents and teachers. So many of you if you talk to counselors right now, the curriculum leaders, principals, they'll tell you how much of their work is basically just dotting the I's and crossing the T's of federal compliance. And it's taken them away from helping students, especially in the high school years, to focus on skill attainment, whether it be career tech or vocational skills or college. And so let's return power and decision making by block granting education back to the states. And it's what we're talking about doing with FEMA. And there was a time prior to 1979, and we just had to ask enough teachers that would have the context, former teachers maybe, have the context of this, where education was free of the federal government dictating from on high what teachers were doing in the classroom.
All right, just a reminder to dial *3 if you'd like to ask the Congressman a question, and *6 if you'd like to subscribe to our e-newsletter. The next question is going to be Glenn from Moyers. Glenn, you're now live.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Mr. Brecheen.
Hi, Glenn.
I want to thank you for doing everything you're doing. I agree with everything you're doing. Thank you so much. And thank you for standing behind our president and fighting for us.
Thank you.
And thank you for being the godly man you are.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate that.
Make sure that you always see fruit, right? Anybody, as a guy told me one time, from being in the ag business, and he asked me one time, he was buying a Gildan, I think, off of me, and he said, "Are you honest?" I said, "I'm a Christian." I was in my 20s. "I'm a Christian." And he said, "That's not what I ask you, young man. Are you honest?" So just make sure you always keep me accountable and make sure you see fruit in my life. But I appreciate that compliment.
Yes, sir. I understand that 100%. All we have is what's inside of us, and it always shows through. Now, I have two questions. Well, Deborah asked one of them, so if it's okay, I will change the other one to insurance in the state of Oklahoma, vehicle and home insurance.
Yes, sir.
Why is it so outrageous? And the second
Yeah,
one is,
look,
why is James Langford fighting Donald Trump and the Republican Party so much?
So let me say, James Langford fighting President Trump, I'm not aware of that. And in terms of what you would be referencing, I would highly encourage you to go talk to the senator and ask him directly. Right? I want to be a person that never talks about somebody behind their back and doesn't say something behind somebody's back I wouldn't say to their face. And so I would encourage you to when you get a chance, to have the opportunity and ask Senator Langford that question, because you may be mischaracterizing his position. I'm not aware of anything since President Trump took office that he's doing to be counter to that. So, but I don't. So I leave that between you and Senator Langford. In terms of insurance, again, most of that is going to be state related. I mean, it was designed for the state to have regulatory authority. Got John Dope, former insurance commissioner for Oklahoma. I visited with him, and he's got a colleague that he worked with in the insurance commissioner, Troy Downing, up here. I talked with Troy on the floor, following what John had asked me to do, because they know each other. Troy's got a bill to return what Dodd-Frank did unconstitutionally in the insurance market, giving more authority to the federal government over insurance. And so I've signed on with Troy following that conversation. John, if you're listening to this, I did follow suit. But in terms of what we can do on the insurance, in terms of what we can do for the cost, give the states more authority, make sure the federal government's not trampling unconstitutionally as it has since Dodd-Frank in that area, and inflation, right? Just inflation compounds inflation. There's more of an excuse for cost increases and, the fact of replacement. Think about if you're insuring a home, right? Cost to build, what inflation did for the cost of building. Well, if you're insuring that home and you have, a tornado or you have a fire damage, then it's going to cost more because the basket of goods, the lumber, the insulation, the wire for the wall, all of that's going to go up. And so again, the biggest thing I think the Congress can do is stop the spend. Let's return revenue balance back to our outlays.
All right, our next question is going to be Robin from Kingston. Robin, you're now live.
Hi, and thank you for taking my call.
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to ask, on Trump's agenda, Medicaid is going to be put back to the state. Now, that means all the...
I'll need to correct that when I answer, but because you're not exactly right there, but there is some intention to rebalance more state share versus the 90-10 match that came in through Obamacare. Keep going.
Okay. So, are they dosing Medicaid up there? Okay.
For fraud. For fraud, I hope so. In fact, I had a chance to...
Will Oklahoma... I'm tired of seeing these senior citizens get $16 in food stamps. Okay? Is the state, through DOGE, going to start seeing more money available for Medicaid if he puts more back towards the state? And as I said, please correct me on the first part you said.
Yeah. Okay. So let me tell you, I am working on, because I'm on the budget committee in this fiscal framework, the Medicaid area has come through our budget committee in terms of us setting this balance for energy and commerce to go find $800 billion in savings on the ledger. And part of that is going to have to be, let me give you some facts on Medicaid. Since Obamacare created the expansion of Medicaid, it no longer is for the blind, aged, disabled, elderly, pregnant, or nursing mothers. The historic LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson era creation of Medicaid, different from Medicare. Medicare, you pay a payroll tax in. Medicaid, Lyndon B. Johnson added for the blind, the aged, the disabled, the pregnant, the poor, indigent, the nursing mothers, disabled. What's happened since the Obamacare years is they've expanded this to try to create socialized health care. And there's a chart. I may have it on my desk here. I want to show it to you. Somewhere in the floor. But it actually, I'm going to get it for you because I think it's important. Because I've been showing this to some colleagues. I showed it to the lead policy guy for President Trump. I want you to look at this. This is from Paragon. I don't know if you can see this, but this is what's happened over the years. As the poverty rate, as Medicaid has increased, watch what happens to the poverty rate. Our goal should not be to add people to Medicaid. Our goal should be to impact the poverty rate. Now, what I also want you to see is the high bar graph area. I want you to look at the poverty rate. We now, for the first time in our nation's history since Medicaid was created, have more people. Look over here, see if I can get, no, it's on the opposite side. More people above this line than below it. That line is the poverty line. We have now more people on Medicaid that are above the poverty line than are below the poverty line. Let me give you another stat. The largest subgroup now that's on Medicaid are the able-bodied. That means the able-bodied guy who's living and able to work, working age, able to take care of himself, is displacing the service provider trying to help the disabled person. That service provider is having to provide services for the able-bodied, whereas the elderly or disabled person has to take line 2, second in line status, because you got too many people now competing for the service provider services. And one more nice little stat for you. Since 2012, the United States population, since 2012, this is when Obama expanded Medicaid. The Medicaid, while the United States population has only grown 6% since 2012, the Medicaid population has grown 60%. So what does that tell you? We have turned Medicaid into what it was never designed for. So if you want to do something to protect the long-term health, the long-term longevity, not only of our nation, but the ability for states, a state-federal match, for the states to be able to fund this, stop the kind of stuff that we're talking about return Medicaid to its historic practice and stop what Medi-Cal in California is doing, where they've been enrolling at the tune of tens of billions of dollars illegals on Medicaid. Some of you hopefully have been paying attention to this. They have been purposely enrolling people on Medicaid. You've got different states that have figured out through NGOs the ability to do transition surgeries for minors, from male to female or female to male, utilizing Medicaid because funds are fungible, even though there's a federal law that says they can't. They end up with these NGOs that pool the funds, and they're able to do this. And whether it's abortion services or that, you get so much of Medicaid dollars for going for things and purposes never originally designed. And so that's what many of us are working on, is to return Medicaid to historic principles.
All right, that was the last question. Congressman, you can go ahead and close it out.
Hey, listen, thank you guys so much for taking the time to join us. There probably will be some things I'm saying that you disagree with. You can get in touch with us by calling our Claremore office or reaching out to us here in D.C. I've got field reps that come to a business near you. If they're not at meetings, they'll be knocking doors at businesses, getting your take as to what, trying to find people in gatherings and be able to pass along to me as I read their field reports. What are your thoughts? What are you thinking? I can't tell you how many times I read field reports about inflation in the last 2 years, and really fueling the fire within me to be able to do what I can to right-size spending and try to do what I could to encourage colleagues and pull on the rope. Some pull for more government. Some of us pull on the rope to say we've got to right-size our spend in order for our kids to inherit the blessing of liberty. If you've agreed or disagreed, please reach out to us. Send us an email. You can follow us. Please follow our newsletter. If you want to know what I'm doing on a weekly basis, sign up for our newsletter. Go to our social media pages and follow what we put out. We try to keep you apprised of our positions on things, whether it's on X or whether it's on True Social or whether it's on Facebook. Also, please feel free to send me a letter. Use the mail, and we're going to make sure that you get a response. And so with that, thank you so much for caring about your government, staying engaged, being an informed citizenry. Doesn't mean you have to agree with us or our positions, but that all of us would do our best. And let me end with this. George Washington had a statement, I love it. And it was after the Jay Treaty. Most people think the Jay Treaty was popular. It was not. Many people wanted to go back to war. And George Washington, who drugged the troops through bloody snow because they couldn't afford shoes, he saw how hard it was for a country that was struggling to finance that war against the greatest empire at the time, the greatest military force, and the miracle that happened. And Washington and Jay's treaty sent John Jay, the first Supreme Court justice, to Great Britain to advocate for peace and to keep us out of another war with them. It was unpopular. The Congress, believe it or not, wanted to go to war. And Washington writes a letter, I think it's to Henry Knox, and he says, if the great power above could erect infallibility among political opinion, there's no being that would resort to it with more eagerness than myself, as while I remain a servant of the public. But given that I found no greater guide hitherto, Old English, than upright intentions and close examination, I shall resort to these maxims while I keep the watch. While I keep the watch is a biblical reference to watchmen on the walls. You'll find in Ezekiel 3 and Ezekiel 33. And Washington knew his Bible. But he was saying, since I can find no better guide than upright intentions and close examination, I will resort to those. That's the difference between a republic and a democracy. Democracy is whatever the wins, popular vote. And as John Adams, the second president of the United States, said, that we're to be a nation of laws, not a nation of men. Popular vote, they were specific and wanted a republic, where upright intentions and close examination of the facts leads you to what, as a republic representation, your representative making the best choice for what they believe is the right thing to produce blessings for you and your children's future. Populism, democracy, that's why you hear so many people want to use that term. Democracy leads to whatever is popular casting the vote. It tramples minority rights. Our founders, Benjamin Franklin, outside the Constitutional Convention, I say this often, was asked by Elizabeth Powell, what have you given us? Have you given us a monarch or a republic? And Benjamin Franklin was very clear. We've given you a republic if you can keep it. Why in Article 4, Section 4, we guarantee to every state a Republican form of a republic and to protect them against invasion. Think about the border on that on Article 4, Section 4. This is a republic. The best you can hope for in people is not perfection of those who you elect, is they would have upright intentions and close examination and make the best decision with an upright conscience. And so if you disagree with me, let me know. I want to remain teachable, but I strive to fulfill that maxim, as Washington called it, of those two elements. God bless you. Thanks for caring about your government.